We live in a world where we crave resolution. We want things to make sense. We want the scales to balance. When someone hurts us, especially someone who made us feel small while elevating themselves, we don't just want healing. We want justice. We want to see consequences, clarity, something that says, what happened to me mattered, what they did was wrong. But here's the hard truth that we don't talk about enough. Sometimes justice doesn't show up when we want it to. Sometimes it doesn't show up in a form we can recognize, and that can feel like betrayal all over again. When you've been wounded by someone who lacks empathy, someone who manipulated, gaslit, or emotionally harmed you, there's a specific kind of ache that lingers. You don't just grieve the loss of the relationship or the person you thought they were. You grieve the loss of certainty, the loss of control, the loss of fairness. And that's a deep, slow kind of pain because your mind keeps looping back. Why do they get away with it? Why does no one see what they really are? That question becomes a wound of its own. You tell yourself, if people knew what they were really like, things would be different. You replay moments in your head, hoping you missed something, some sign that justice is on its way. You pray for closure, for vindication, for a sign that what they did hasn't been erased or forgotten. But this is the tension we have to sit in, the tension of the unknown. It's the space between the harm and the healing. The space between the offense and the outcome, and sitting in that space is excruciating because it demands trust when you feel most unsafe. It demands faith when you're full of doubt. We want divine justice to look like a courtroom, clear evidence. A verdict, consequences, but what if it looks more like silence? What if it looks like waiting without knowing? That's the part no one tells you about. Sometimes divine justice isn't about watching them fall. It's about learning how to stand, even when the people who hurt you are still walking freely. The myth we carry, the one we were taught without even realizing, is that justice should be swift and obvious. We think if we were really valued, if God really saw, if the universe really cared, then those who hurt us would suffer right away. But life isn't that linear, and God isn't a vending machine. You don't insert your pain and immediately get back an apology or a breakdown or a perfect resolution. That's not how healing works. That's not how growth works. And that's not how justice, real justice, works either. Because real justice, the kind that transforms hearts and frees souls, takes time. It works in silence. It works in secret. It doesn't always make headlines. It doesn't always come with confession or closure. But that doesn't mean it isn't happening. Sometimes justice is the long, invisible unraveling of the lies someone built their life on. Sometimes it's the loneliness they can't name, the disconnection they can't repair, the mask they can't ever take off without risking collapse. You might never see it, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. And more importantly, sometimes divine justice is about what happens in you, not them. Sometimes the greatest act of justice is reclaiming your peace, choosing your joy, healing in places where you were broken. Not letting their toxicity rot the rest of your life. That's not letting them off the hook. That's getting yourself off of it. We confuse justice with revenge all the time. We think if we aren't angry, we're letting them win. If we don't get payback, it means they escaped. But you are not the judge, you are not the jury, and you were never meant to be. What you're responsible for is your healing, your story, your next chapter. Divine justice isn't about equal pain. It's about restored wholeness. There will be days when that feels hollow. Days when you look at their life, curated, polished, uninterrupted, and feel like your pain didn't register. But you don't have to see their downfall to validate your worth. You don't need their suffering to believe your hurt was real. So yes, sit in the tension, let yourself ache for the justice that hasn't come yet, but don't let it define you. Don't let it keep you in a cycle of rewatching pain through the lens of powerlessness. That's not your job anymore. The work now is surrender, not giving up, but releasing control, choosing to believe that what is unseen is not untrue. That even if you don't get the ending you imagined, you can still create a life that feels safe, true, and good. Because justice might not come the way you expected, but healing still can, peace still can, and maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of divine justice your soul needed all along. When someone wounds you deeply, especially someone who operates through manipulation, control, and emotional distortion, it can take years to understand what actually happened. The damage isn't always loud or visible. It's subtle, it's internal. And for many, the heaviest part of the healing journey is realizing how much of someone else's shame we've been carrying, often without even knowing it. When you're in a relationship with someone who lacks accountability, who distorts reality to protect their own image, you start to absorb the weight of their dysfunction. You internalize the blame, the confusion, the gaslighting. You start questioning your memory, your reactions, your needs. Over time, you begin to carry the shame that was never yours in the first place. It's like emotional smog. You don't see it at first, but you're breathing it in every day, and it starts to poison how you see yourself. Narcissists, in particular, are masters at offloading their internal chaos onto others. Their shame, the deep sense of unworthiness they refuse to confront, gets projected onto you. Every time they twist the truth, shift the blame, or minimize your pain, they are doing one thing: refusing to face their own mirror. And instead of confronting their inner world, they make you responsible for their emotional mess. Their shame becomes your confusion. Their insecurity becomes your silence. Their rage becomes your guilt. It's subtle but powerful. You start thinking you're too sensitive, too emotional, too needy. You apologize for things you didn't do. You shrink to avoid triggering them. You edit your truth to keep the peace. And without realizing it, you begin to carry the emotional consequences of their choices. Their inability to love becomes your unworthiness. Their disrespect becomes your self-doubt. And somewhere along the way, you lose sight of the difference between what was done to you and what belongs to you. This is what happens when we carry someone else's shame. It silences us. It keeps us small. It tells us that healing isn't for people like us, that maybe we deserved it, or maybe we made it worse, or maybe if we had just been stronger, they would have treated us better. That's what shame does. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It convinces you that you are the problem, and it keeps you stuck in cycles that look like protection, but are actually prisons. One of the hardest parts of healing is recognizing that this shame isn't yours to hold. It never was. But walking away from it isn't just about letting it go. It's about grieving what it cost you. It's about feeling the weight of how long you carried it, how it shaped you, how it altered the way you see the world and yourself. It's about facing the anger, the sadness, the betrayal of realizing that someone else's brokenness was handed to you like it was yours to manage. There's a moment in the healing process where everything feels heavier before it gets lighter. That's the moment where you stop protecting the person who hurt you. You stop making excuses for them. You stop rewriting history to make their behavior seem less cruel. You stop justifying what cannot be justified, and in that moment you reclaim your truth. Not the version you were fed, but the version you lived. And here's what's even more courageous. You don't have to wait for them to take responsibility in order to put their shame down. You don't need an apology or an acknowledgement or some grand gesture of remorse. You can grieve without permission. You can heal without their participation. and you can refuse to carry what was never yours without their agreement. Because the truth is, people who rely on control and manipulation often don't change. They don't suddenly wake up with insight or empathy. And if you wait for them to validate your pain, you might be waiting your whole life. That doesn't mean your pain isn't valid. It means your healing can't depend on their awakening. Real healing starts the moment you say, "I'm not carrying this anymore." Not because it didn't hurt, not because it doesn't still linger in your bones, but because you are no longer willing to sacrifice your peace for someone else's avoidance. You are no longer willing to lose yourself in the hope that they might someday find themselves. This is what reclaiming your life looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not always loud. It's the quiet decision to stop living under the weight of someone else's denial. It's the daily practice of choosing self-compassion over self-blame. It's standing in front of the mirror and reminding yourself their behavior was a reflection of them, not me. And the moment you put their shame down, you begin to see clearly again. You start to hear your own voice. You begin to feel your own worth. You learn to hold yourself with kindness, to tend to your wounds with truth, and to move forward not because justice has arrived, but because you are no longer willing to live in emotional exile from your own soul. That's the cost of carrying their shame, but more importantly, that's the freedom of finally setting it down. There's a quiet ache that follows you after being mistreated by someone who refuses to be accountable. It's not just the pain of what they did, it's the pain of watching them move through life without consequences, still charming, still successful, still fooling everyone. And that ache, if we're honest, can turn into something heavier. The belief that life is unfair, that good people suffer while the ones who caused the suffering never have to answer for it. That belief is exhausting. It makes you feel invisible. It makes you question the very idea of justice. But there's something deeper underneath that ache, something harder to name. It's the fear that what happened to you doesn't matter because it wasn't publicly acknowledged. It's the quiet desperation for karma to show up, to balance the scales, to remind the universe that truth still matters. And when that doesn't happen quickly or loudly or visibly, it starts to feel like maybe it never will. That's when we start to confuse karma with cruelty. We think if the people who hurt us aren't suffering, then we must not matter. We think that divine justice must be broken. But karma isn't punishment. It's not revenge dressed up in spiritual language. It's not about wishing for someone's downfall. It's not about imagining them finally being exposed. Karma is simply this. Eventually UBE, it's GIN to weigh SEE, the 2U. Dynamic, and that includes brokenness. People who harm others, especially those who do it with intention, manipulation, and self-righteousness, are not immune to that return. But it doesn't always look like we expect. We want to see them fall apart. We want a front row seat to their reckoning. But most of the time, that's not how it happens. Brokenness doesn't always look like loss. Sometimes it looks like disconnection. It looks like chronic emptiness. It looks like relationships they can't keep, peace they can't find, love they can't feel. It looks like living behind a mask so long they forget what their real face ever looked like. The truth is, people who build their lives on denial, blame, and control are already living in a kind of prison. It might not be visible, but it's there because you can't run from your inner world forever. You can distract yourself with success, followers, attention, status, but eventually, the weight of your unresolved truth catches up. And when that mirror finally turns toward them, it's not karma being cruel. It's life being honest. The idea that brokenness has a mirror doesn't mean you get to see it. That's the hardest part. You may never get confirmation that they faced consequences. You may never hear their apology or witness their collapse. But just because it doesn't happen in front of you doesn't mean it isn't happening. Life has a way of bringing people face to face with who they are, not because we demanded it, but because it's part of the human experience. You cannot fake wholeness forever. Eventually, what's inside comes to the surface, and maybe the real invitation isn't to wait for karma to come knocking on their door. Maybe the deeper call is to stop needing their suffering as proof that yours was real, because your pain already matters. Your story already counts. You don't need someone else's consequences to validate what you went through. That need, while understandable, is rooted in the belief that justice must be visible to be true. But some of the deepest forms of justice are internal. They are quiet, slow, sacred transformations that happen beyond our view. There's nothing wrong with wanting justice. That desire is deeply human. It means you care about right and wrong. It means you value truth. But there's a difference between wanting justice and being consumed by the need for someone else to pay. When you fixate on their reckoning, you stay tied to them. Your healing becomes dependent on their breaking. And that's not freedom. That's another form of emotional captivity. Trusting that brokenness has a mirror means trusting that the truth has a life of its own. It means believing that energy doesn't vanish, it shifts. It means accepting that even if you don't get to see the fallout, it doesn't mean they got away with it. It just means the universe, or God, or whatever name you give the sacred, is handling things in a way you may never understand. And maybe that's the most courageous thing you can do. Trust that life is wiser than your need for control. Trust that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reality finally catching up. Sometimes it's about someone waking up in a life that looks perfect on the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. Sometimes it's about a person being so disconnected from love and truth that they can't even access the parts of life that make it worth living. That's not cruelty. That's the echo of the choices they made. You don't have to carry bitterness to believe in justice. You don't have to wish them harm to know they'll face themselves eventually, and you don't have to wait for their mirror moment to start living your life again. The moment you release your grip on needing their downfall, you create space for your own rise. The moment you stop needing karma to do something loud, you begin to experience peace in quiet, unexpected ways. So no, karma isn't cruelty. It's just clarity that arrives in its own time, and while it's not your job to witness it, it is your invitation to trust it. Because even if you never see it happen, you can still walk away knowing that truth has a pulse, and it never stays buried forever. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize the person who hurt you may never say sorry. They may never own what they did. They may never lose sleep over it, never explain, never see it the way you do. And the longer you wait for that kind of closure, the more you bleed into your own life. It's a harsh reality, but it's also the beginning of something deeper, something liberating. Because when you stop needing someone else to make things right, you start realizing that healing yourself is the boldest form of justice there is. We often think justice means a courtroom, a confession, a consequence. But real justice, the kind that restores and liberates, doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's invisible, and sometimes it looks like finally being able to breathe without feeling like your past is pressing on your chest. When you've been hurt by someone who couldn't or wouldn't care about the damage they caused, especially someone who distorted love into control, who made you question your reality, who dismissed your pain, you carry not just the wound, but the silence that follows, and silence can feel like betrayal. You start to believe that if the world doesn't see the harm, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you're exaggerating. Maybe your pain doesn't count. That's the lie. That's the trap. Because the truth is, your pain doesn't need to be proven to be real. And your healing doesn't need to be justified to be valid. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're not weak for being hurt. What happened to you mattered. But what matters more now is what you do with that pain. Choosing to heal is not saying it's okay. It's saying I won't let what happened continue to define me. It's refusing to build your future from the rubble of someone else's choices. It's deciding that your peace is more important than their punishment, that your freedom is more sacred than their downfall. That's a hard thing to do, especially when your heart is still bruised and your nervous system is still waiting for the next blow. Especially when they walked away untouched while you were left holding the broken pieces. But every time you take a step toward healing, you take back something they tried to steal. Your clarity, your confidence, your dignity, your joy. That's real justice, because people who operate from a place of harm and manipulation rely on one thing: that you'll stay stuck in the wreckage they created, that you'll keep repeating the pain, that you'll keep looking to them for closure. They thrive off the power imbalance. But when you stop handing them your energy, when you stop needing them to validate your experience, you disrupt that entire system. You don't get even by becoming like them. You don't win by proving your pain louder than their denial. You win by becoming whole in a way they never could. You win by reclaiming your light. You win by refusing to let their dysfunction infect the rest of your story. And the truth is, healing is not soft. It's not passive. It's not a quiet retreat from the pain. Healing is fierce. It takes more strength to face your wounds than to ignore them. It takes more courage to choose peace over payback. It takes more resilience to forgive, not to forget, but to set yourself free from the emotional grip of the past. Forgiveness in this context isn't about them. It's not about saying what they did was okay. It's not about inviting them back into your life. It's about you not carrying the poison anymore. It's about unclenching your fists not for their sake, but for your own. Because your body, your spirit, your future cannot thrive when it's weighed down by resentment. Revenge wants them to hurt like you did. Healing wants you to never hurt like that again. That's the difference. That's the shift. And it doesn't mean you pretend to be okay when you're not. It means you give yourself permission to feel every ounce of grief, every wave of rage, every layer of confusion, and then move through it rather than live in it. And one day, maybe not right away, but eventually you'll notice something. You'll laugh without bitterness. You'll rest without fear. You'll stop rehearsing the past like it's the only story you know. And when that happens, that's justice. That's what divine balance looks like. That's the moment you realize they don't get to own your narrative anymore. Because your wholeness is the one thing they can't fake, can't touch, and can't take credit for. You earned it. You fought for it, you bled for it, and you deserve to live in it. So don't wait for karma to catch up. Don't wait for an apology that may never come. Don't wait for the world to recognize what you went through. Your healing is your justice, your joy is your proof, your peace is your power, and the boldest revenge is this: you survived. Now go live like it.